Hey, I'm Chris Cuomo, and welcome to a NewsNation Town Hall, Crime in America. What do you say? Let's get after it.
It's everywhere, in every drug across the United States.
I'm just letting you know we lost another one. We don't even talk about it anymore.
The homeless situation.
An epidemic of crime.
1050.
Swing the machete. People drive by like it's nothing. The cops don't come.
Get out!
This is costing taxpayers millions of dollars.
The cartel controls everything that happens here.
He just tried to run over the trooper. Get out!
When you feel unsafe in your own home, there's definitely a problem.
This is a war! Act like it! Do something!
It's time to talk about everything we've been seeing and hearing. Hello, everybody. It's Monday. We're live, and this is the NewsNation Town Hall on Crime in America. Now, we are doing this bigger and I think better than I've ever seen in a town hall before, and I've done many of them, and I think they're a great forum. But tonight, we got like a three-ring circus. We got live audiences in 3 cities, New York, Chicago, Dallas, Fort Worth, filled with people who have questions, concerns, experiences, all to share. And instead of pinning it to one big name, which is what we usually do, we're using elected officials and people who are fighting crime and advocates from cities all across the country, big and small. So we have dozens of communities represented. And we're giving it 2 hours with only a couple of commercial breaks. So let me tell you something. That's rare in this business, all right? But the bosses believe, and they're right, that this is the way you have a real conversation. This is how you get different perspectives from what's going wrong, where, and what's working, and why. Now, why are we doing it like this? Because NewsNation is more like a movement than it is a media company. We're doing things like tonight to push past left and right and get to reasonable, so we can cover what matters most to the most people in America. And crime, top concern, always. A new NewsNation and Decision Desk HQ poll, registered voters found the following. 50% of us say there's more crime in the community where they live. 58% said the criminal justice system is not tough enough on crime. So, are they right? Let's start with the reality. Overall in the country, which is a very deceptive way to look at it, is crime worse? The easiest answer is yes, but it depends. What are you asking about and where? Homicides, right? We should care about those the most, people killing people. They're down in most places this year, but they jumped over 30% during the pandemic. Why? We're going to talk about it tonight. The real concern is what we're seeing, like you did at the top of the show, in just too many places. People just stealing stuff, destroying stuff, hurting people, not being arrested, or it seems even challenged. Stores say they lost nearly $100 billion in 2022 to retail theft. Guess who pays? We do. Okay? Carjackings are up more than anything else. Why? Again, you're going to get perspective from people who are living it every day. It's up a third nationally. Chicago, 121%. Durham, North Carolina, 172%. Why? What can be done about it? Now, tonight, I really want you to get this point. This is big on people, problems, policies, not politics. And here's why. Whether you're on the left or the right, okay, all due respect, but you need to know that crime works as a problem better than as a solution too often in party politics. The left often sees it as a poverty and race play almost exclusively. That's led to good policies, but also policies of not prosecuting crimes in places, letting people out of jail who offend again, troubling scenes of apparently rampant drug use, homelessness. We'll be talking about San Francisco tonight. Is that a fair assessment? Are stores under siege? What should be done? Now, in a zero-sum game, what's the opposite party going to do? The opposite. More guns, more harsh penalties, including the death penalty. Well, what do we see there? It's not a panacea. The places where it's easier to get a gun, okay? Not easy, but easier than other states, and they have the death penalty, 60% higher homicide rate than states with stronger gun laws. So are you a gun law away from being safer? Maybe, maybe not. See, the data can tell you any story you want, and that's why you need a cross of perspectives, okay? And if you want to talk about why the world is fascinated by us with mass shootings, you got to talk about all of this. Here's the good news. We can do better. And everyone participating tonight is proof of that. So let's get a feel for why people came, because the people who matter the most, especially on my show, are you guys, okay? So let's go to some audience members, find out why they came. Who wants to tell me why they came tonight? Kathy does. Kathy, why'd you come?
I came because I really love what NewsNation does about giving the story straight and getting the both sides, but I'm mad at so many things happening that people don't get accounted for.
Okay, so we're doing that tonight. Dusty, too. Was Dusty a draw? Did you want to meet Dusty?
Yes. We share a birthday.
Oh, jeez. That's a plant right there. I didn't know that. I didn't even know. So, how about you? Why'd you come tonight? Tell everybody your name.
I'm Melanie. I came tonight because I'm a parent, a small business owner, a common sense voter, and a lifelong New Yorker, and I've been here my whole life, and I see crime ebb and flow, and we're definitely headed in the wrong direction, so.
All right, all right. How about young Mr. Gall? Why are you here, sir?
I think as a young person, this is an important issue to me. I want to make sure the future of our country is bright, but also I think if we're critical about law enforcement and crime, there's a tremendous opportunity to improve our country, make it more equal, more just. So I'm excited to hear about that.
And you're all right with doing it this way, having like a cross-section of different officials, different cities, different places, instead of just like one man or woman who says they want to be president? Listen to me.
And no, I actually like this better. Yeah, I think this is phenomenal.
Because it would have been really uncomfortable if you said you wanted to be president. Good time. All right, so now let's do this. Before I introduce who's on the panel, okay? Because now this matters, all right? Saying no has to come with a cost when you're an official, okay? Because you're given power and you got to be held to account. Dusty and the team reached out to nearly 50 mayors across the country. A lot of them didn't respond or said they couldn't come on. And now on the screen, I'm going to show you the names. And it's a long list, okay? Here in New York City, we have Mayor Eric Adams, okay? Now, he may have, like all the others, legitimate reasons, okay? But he didn't offer one. And after this show, there's a decent chance if I skip to enough New York City hotspots, I'll probably bang into the mayor on pretty much any given night. And good for him. Live your life. Enjoy it. But to not show up to a forum in your city with all the concern about what's happening here on your streets, in your homes, in your stores, and what you're doing about it, and the concerns of voters, it tells you something when he doesn't want to come, whatever the reason, okay? What tells you more are the mayors and city officials who did decide to come on, even when they're in crisis. From Toledo, Ohio, okay, we have Mayor Wade Kapsakavich, okay? The big story and why I wanted Toledo so much here is, one, there are a lot of Toledos in America, okay, and places who have the same population, the same kind of challenges. In 2023, crime stats are down in every category from where they were a year ago. Homicides are down almost 4 in 10, okay? They're down almost 40%. Thefts of motor vehicles are actually down. Now, that is ridiculously rare in this country. We got to find out why. Is Kapsakavich just getting lucky? Burglaries are down almost 10%. Shootings are down 28%. All right, so we have Mayor Kapsakavich here to talk about what they're doing, what's working, what's not. Now, Little Rock, Arkansas, okay? Mayor Frank Scott Jr. Little Rock has been recently ranked as one of the most dangerous places to live, number 5 on U.S. News and World Report for 2023-2024. Why? Lots of challenges, lots of funding challenges to fight those challenges. Mayor Scott has made bringing down crime a big priority in Little Rock. Now, this year to date, homicide rates in Little Rock are down 34% from last year. You see how the picture gets complicated? Wait, you just said it's one of the most dangerous places to live. And then this year, it's down 34%. You see, data can tell you anything you want it to. So you got to get perspective and context. So we have the mayor here to make the case about what's happening there and what's working. From Durham, North Carolina, Mayor Elaine O'Neill joins us. Durham has one of the highest crime rates in the country. Homicides, property crime, burglaries, assault, all up. Motor vehicle theft, as I told you earlier, is up 172.3%. Why? We got the mayor here. She knows. She's spoken out on her concern for rising crime rates, has called on everyone in her community to get involved. She sees gun violence as a major central concern that needs action. What? What is the resistance? Mayor Elaine O'Neill. And from Hartford, Connecticut, Mayor Luke Bronin. Now, he has vowed to crack down on repeat offenders, okay? That's a very interesting aspect in criminality because It's going to create a political rub, right? Well, you're punishing people, you should be using diversion, and what happens? He initiated a task force to address gun violence in Hartford. Robberies with firearms, up 7% from this time last year. They were up 28% 2022. So the rate's going the right way. You okay with those stats? I see he's looking at him. He's like, I got better numbers. All right, we'll get to him in a second. Mayor Luke Bronin, I appreciate him being here. And we can't talk about crime in America right now without San Francisco, right? It's just become a touchstone for how you feel about the issue. He's going to be on later in the show, and he'll talk about what he sees as hype versus the reality, all right? So Matt Dorsey, he's a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. We'll be talking about the perception of the problem, what he sees as the reality, but most importantly, what are they doing about it, okay? Now, most important to me, you didn't have to do this, okay? There are reasons to spend your time 100 different ways. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank all of you. Those are the applause I want for you for being here tonight. Thank you very much. Now, we do have some really, really good members of the law enforcement and advocacy community here. I'll be introducing them later in the show. And then once everybody's into it, we have 2 hours with only a couple of breaks. So I do not have to be in a rush. I'm just excited. So we're going to take our time. We're going to ask a lot of questions. Dusty's in the control room figuring out where we go, and we have Chicago and we have Dallas. So that's it. We ready to go? Good. We're ready to go. Let me set the table a little bit with challenges. Let's talk about Little Rock and Toledo, okay? Now, I want to start with Little Rock and Mayor Scott Jr. The idea of being one of the most dangerous places, okay, in the country. How do you deal with that, and how do you identify what the main problem is for that designation?
Well, I think we first have to understand that perception in many people's eyes is reality. From a mayor's standpoint, we have to address reality first and foremost, because we're the ones that receive the phone calls of a homicide, a battery assault, domestic violence. I can tell you right now, each homicide that's happened over the past 4.5 years that I've been in office. I can share with you, as someone who lives in more crime-ridden area of the city, I don't feel unsafe. I can tell you that many residents may feel that same way, not feeling unsafe when you see that particular stat. However, there are some residents who do. And so what we have to do is always address the feeling of crime and the feeling of safety, irrespective of those statistics.
What's the biggest thing that has to be done in Little Rock?
The biggest thing, one, is really not one thing. It's a multitude of things. What we've been able to do to drive crime down, a -5% year over year, even violent crime, a -3% in overall crime. When you look at the past 5 years, a -1%. So we're driving crime down.
How?
We're doing it with a 3-pronged approach. That 3-pronged approach is targeted patrols in high-crime areas, number one. Number two, we focused on getting smarter on crime by funding through the American Rescue Plan Act, a real-time crime center, by putting additional eyes on the streets. Then number three is understanding that we have to really focus on prevention. And the best way to focus on prevention of crime, when you look at the statistics, you know that many of our youth and our young adults are committing most of the crime. And so we spent close to $7 million this past year on prevention, intervention, treatment work. And then fourth, we also have to understand how mental health has really contributed to crime over the past 2 and 3 years. And so that's the reason why we now have a mental health unit within the Little Rock Police Department.
Mayor Kapsakavich, in Toledo, the numbers are gaudy. You know, they're so obvious, the downs. What has worked best in your estimation to stave off what we're seeing in so many other places in the country?
I think, much like Mayor Scott said, we're not doing any one thing. We're doing everything. We are growing the size of our police force. The 20 years before I became mayor, the number of our officers on the street steadily declined. Frankly, it was used as a budget balancing tool by previous mayors. We've actually grown it. You know, for as much political hyperbole as the phrase defund the police has gotten, God is my witness, I don't know a single city in this country that has defunded the police. We certainly haven't in Toledo. We've grown the size of the police budget, and with more officers on the streets, we've been able to have them get out of their squad cars and go back to foot patrols and other things we know work, but that's not the end. We've also had historic investments in youth programming. We're fighting blight. We are making long-term investments in people's lives. I think all of it has added up to some really encouraging numbers. I will say this, because I don't know how often I'm going to get a chance to speak. I think there's so many people, what's happening in this country? It cannot be a coincidence that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, every city in America 3-4 years ago saw their numbers spike. And it's probably not a coincidence that many cities now are starting to see it come down. So much of this was due to the pandemic, but probably not in the way that you think. Sure, there was economic anxiety and kids not going to school. What it really did, at least in my city, it shut down the criminal justice system. I mean, we didn't have a jury trial for 2 years. How can you have a jury trial when you're not allowed to be 6 feet away from each other? I believe in diversion programs. We're working against the school to prison pipeline in Toledo as much as we're a MacArthur grant city. But there are some folks who need to be in jail.
Yeah.
And when we couldn't have a jury trial, those folks weren't in jail. They were out doing what they shouldn't. That's why this spiked over the whole country. And I think we're starting, in addition to putting more police in the street and investing in youth and fighting blight and doing all the things that, I think that as the criminal justice system catches up, we're going to start to see better numbers. That's what I believe is happening nationally.
You know, it's interesting. We already learned something. We're going to go to the audience now. Where's Deborah? Good. We already learned something about why this issue is so hard. It's complicated. You know, Jordan Peterson has a great line. He says, beware single-factor explanations to complex problems. That's why this issue is such an easy one to use as a stick, you know, because it's so complicated to solve. So it's easy to say tough on crime, but people don't want to do everything they have to do. Deborah, thank you for joining us. What's your question?
My question is, I am a retail business owner. I've had 2 businesses in New York for 35 years now, and I've ridden all the waves, including, you know, the 2008 and all the craziness that's happened. And my question right now is, I am not a mayor basher. I think that he inherited problems that he's been working really hard to fix. I don't think any of these single mayors can fix the crime in America problem. I think that what we need to focus on more is, I want to know why the justice system has shut down to the extent that it has, and when it's going to really kick back in so that these people who need to be punished, those people who belong in jail, can really be in jail so that we can continue with our lives. I just think that I don't think that's being addressed enough as a business owner and as a resident of this city. I've lived here since I'm 19 years old.
Has your store been affected?
My stores were robbed 4 times during the pandemic. It was all, and you know, I've been robbed before. People come in, they put clothing under their shirts and they run out your store. And I mean, it's so jarring. And I have seen that completely, it's not completely gone, but there's definitely a change. It's really been lessened greatly, which I really appreciate. So I think that one of the things that I feel more comfortable with right now is that degree of theft and craziness has really slowed. But I wonder, my big question is, how does America get back to being not, the topic of conversation right now about America, and I travel extensively, is your country is falling apart, the crime situation. People talk to me about that a lot. I speak 5 languages. I travel all the time. These are the questions I get, and I feel it myself. I've raised 2 boys on this island of Manhattan, and I think that, we need to be careful. I think this is a fabulous forum because it is saying both sides, let's hear what you have to say, right? And I think that's important. But I do wonder, now that we've gotten to this point of extreme, how do we really roll it back? We need to really roll it back so America can become...
Get more reasonable voices. Yeah. All right, let's hear from one of the mayors. Mayor O'Neill, the idea of, so there's three real things packed in that, right? One is, how do you message in an environment where everybody wants us to be in the worst shape that we've ever been, right? That's it's like, who's more to blame? But that's the narrative. Boy, we are hurting. 2, the idea that the shoplifting is a function of not wanting to prosecute crimes, and that's led by Democrat cities. And the third aspect of it is that the criminal justice system was frozen during the pandemic. Well, then how do you unfreeze it even faster? What do you have on those?
So, having been a former judge for 25 years before I became a mayor, I'm in my 2nd year as mayor, had a lot of time to look at all of those issues involving different aspects of crime. It all comes down to really one basic thing in my mind that we have to address if we're going to deal with these issues: housing. There is a housing crisis. When people do not have a place to live that is safe and where they can begin to have a life, you create a life where you are. And we don't have a housing crisis in terms of a stock. we have an affordability crisis. And people got to realize that.
So when you were judge and I was defense counsel, and I said, he broke into the place, he stole it, but he's trying to make his next month's rent, would you let him go?
No, it depends on, that would be such an easy way to get out of it. But what I would do is try to find a way to mitigate him or her doing that again. And you always have to look back at where people live. I would tell you that as an African-American woman, most African-Americans have been housing insecure forever, for a long time. We've never had secure housing from the moment we stepped in this country on a boat. It's always been an issue. It just depends on how bad it is. I've never seen it this worse, right? Because now you're pulling in a lot of middle-class folk, a lot of people, your firefighters, your teachers, all of those folks, they're struggling to find a decent place to live. So we've got to deal with that. And there's a lot of greed going on out there as people are suffering from a lack of housing. You're seeing all these houses go up all over the country. All over the country. It's no doubt in my mind that if you address housing first, you can deal with a lot of your crime issues.
Maria. What is your question?
Hi. I live in New York City. I'm a lifelong New Yorker, mother of 3 children, and we are in the midst of a mental health crisis and a substance abuse crisis. I was sucker punched in Central Park just walking my dog by someone who seemed to have no idea that he was even engaging in a violent act. And we've had some really serious fatalities. A woman was thrown on the subway to her death, Michelle Go. Just this past weekend, 2 small children were attacked randomly by somebody who was having a mental health crisis. An EMT worker was stabbed recently. And it's obvious to anyone who lives in New York that our government is just not taking care of this, and that people need help. They need services. They need treatment for their mental illness, but we're not doing enough about it. And so,
I'll ask.
So my question is, what can we do? How can we get our elected leaders to do more to take care of the people who so desperately need help?
Now, to be fair to the context of the question, can't ask Mayor Adams because he didn't want to come tonight. And again, it's not a shame game. I like Mayor Adams. He's a good guy. He's popular. But again, it's your city. You're going to have problems. You have a chance to talk about it. You should. Mayor Bronin, the take on mental health is we're starting to talk about it. Where we don't just say everybody's crazy. We're treating it like it's a health issue and that we should be sensitive to it. But there's still this cultural resistance to forgiving someone for doing something wrong just because they're mentally ill. And I think that's been a real obstacle in helping. So what have you seen in Hartford in terms of what you do with mentally ill who commit crimes, which, by the way, is a very small number, right, just to deal with prejudice? The mentally ill are statistically much more likely to be victims of crime than they are perpetrators of it. But the perception is out there. How do you address it?
First of all, thanks for having me on. Mental health is an incredibly broad category, an incredibly broad term, and it includes a lot of things. I think it ought to include just the fact that we're seeing more and more people having trouble managing their emotions. You see that on airplanes, you see that in road rage, you see that showing up in so many different ways. That's a mental health issue, and we have to talk about that and we have to address it. And then you have the much more acute type of mental health, diagnosed clinical mental health problems. And as you say, Chris, and I think it's a really important point, vast majority of people with mental health issues are not violent, but there are people who are. There are people who have an extensive history of violence and an extensive history of diagnosed mental health issues. And too often in our country, the only place where those people get any treatment for those issues is in prison. And they should get treatment when they're in prison. I think they should get better treatment than they're getting when they're in prison. But the real problem is that when they come out, they don't get any. So you have so many examples of people who are on meds and managing when they're in the correctional system, and when they're out, they fall apart. And it's devastating to their lives, and it becomes dangerous to communities. And I do think that this is, as a nation, across the country, a failure of systems and a failure of us as a society to recognize that we have to do more. And I think in some cases that may mean that you have to compel people to get treated. And
what does that mean?
Well, you know, someone described New York has attempted to attempt this.
The
right?
Democrats are very quick to push back on people's privacy rights and HIPAA laws, and that you can't make somebody and you can't take away their power like that. It's been an obstacle to red flag laws more on the left than the right. What do you think?
Rightly so. But at the same time, I think somebody, I don't remember who, in talking about what New York was trying to do in this area, said, you know, that it's not coercion, it's compassion when you're helping somebody who needs treatment get treatment. And I think that was really well said. I also think that we have to recognize that this will take an investment of resources. Right now, we don't have the places that have the capacity to provide this kind of support. Emergency rooms aren't the place, but too often they've become the place. You know, our police, if they see somebody who's repeatedly threatening people in the community but hasn't yet committed a crime, they don't have a lot of options. Sometimes the only option they have is to bring somebody to an emergency room for a short period of time. And oftentimes, that emergency room, which isn't equipped to deal with that challenge, will say, we don't have a medical reason to hold this person, we're going to let him out. And then you have no answer because there are not the places, the facilities, the support structure in place to deal with that. Now, there's a whole spectrum of things you could be doing. We should be doing a lot more on supportive housing because not everybody needs to be in an institutional setting. A lot of people who can actually live independent, healthy lives if they've got that support. And that's an investment well worth making because it's a fraction of the cost.
So let me do a bounce question on it, and then I want to go to Chicago because we have three different audiences that all have questions. But Mayor Kapsakavich, and let me see if they're with me on this first. Who considers addiction to drugs an aspect of mental illness or mental health? How many hands? Should be all of you. But that's okay. That's okay. The idea that, okay, so I would say it was 60-40. Yes. 40%, let's just say. It's a big point of resistance that you're on drugs, you commit a crime, that's your problem. You shouldn't have taken the drugs, Kapsakavich. And I don't want this person given a break. So your jails, your prisons wind up being filled up with users. How do you deal with that, and what is the reality of addiction's influence on crime?
I'm going to take this answer in a slightly different direction. Addiction is...
As a mayor, absolutely.
But I'm still going to answer your question.
Go ahead.
Of course, addiction is a huge part of what we're dealing with, huge. And mental illness is as well, and I do think they are linked. I'm a little more bullish on the mental health conversation in this country. I can't remember a time when we more openly talked about mental health, where there's been less stigma. And I have 2 teenage kids, and they're just so open, talking about it in a way that I'm a Gen X or my generation never did. And we're also using American resource dollars. We put $2 million into boosting mental health. I get it. I bristle, though, when there are politicians who sometimes hide behind mental illness as an excuse not to take stronger action on guns in general. And here's where I'm headed with this. We're the only country in the history of the world where there are more guns than people. And whenever there's a mass shooting, you hear ideologues, primarily on the right, say, well, you know, this is mental health. It probably is mental health. Don't they have mental illness in Great Britain? Don't they have it in Germany? Don't they have it in Australia? Well, you know, it's these violent video games. Maybe. I'm sure they have violent video games in Canada and elsewhere. There's one country, only one country that is so fundamentally given up on doing anything. This is a common sense, middle of the ground forum, good. All right? It shouldn't be going out on a limb to try to take AR-15s away from the mentally ill and terrorists, but yet our U.S. Senate won't do it and our Supreme Court doesn't seem to care. There are disagreements have been happening since Adam and Eve, or at least, if not Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. The difference is, only in about the last 10, 15 years have we as a nation just thrown up our hands and say, oh, well, have as many AR-15s as you want. So disagreements that used to end in bloody lips or black eyes or bloody noses on the playground are now homicides. And there aren't 2 countries where that happens, 1. There's one country where that happens. So I'm all in on mental health, but I don't like when I hear senators saying, oh, this is a mental health problem. Yeah, it is.
Well, look,
but there's another problem that never gets talked about. We're half an hour in and no one was going to talk about guns, I bet.
I would say that we were definitely going to talk about guns because you can't talk about crime without talking guns. It just can't get anybody.
We never do as a country.
But you just can't get anything done about it. That's why. I mean,
it's not the fault of mayors, I'll tell you that.
But I'm not blaming the mayors. But look, it's also the only right that's established in the Constitution that has as many qualifications on it as it does.
I get it.
So, you know, to people who believe in the Constitution, you say, well, the Second Amendment is still good law, right? Yeah, it's still good law. Okay. it has more qualifications on it, more buts on it than any other right that we give or that is given in this society. So that's why I think it's become a football. But your point stands. I want to go to Chicago. We're definitely going to talk about guns. It's just about, will anything actually happen? Dusty, who do we have in Chicago? Jen in Chicago. Thank you for joining us. How is it in Chicago so far?
Thank you for having me on. It's a great experience.
Great. Everybody awake?
So,
everybody awake?
Everybody's awake, right?
All right. I'll take it as a win.
Thank
What's your
goodness.
question?
All right. All right. So I was a victim of felony strong arm robbery the night that Mayor Johnson was elected. It was about 15 minutes before his election. There was a mother, her son, and daughter who are adults that beat me up, stole my phone, and they were my neighbors. And they thought they got away with it. They knew that detectives would never pick this up because it's a low-level felony in Chicago, and there just isn't the resources to do this. I was very lucky. My case was picked up by a detective and his team, and it was still months where I was terrorized by my neighbors, thinking that they had gotten away with it because low-level crimes aren't prosecuted here. And I'm a victim just like any other person that's been a victim of a crime. And I was promised if it got all the way to the dance, if it got all the way to the state's attorneys, that nothing was going to happen, that it wasn't going to get prosecuted. And, you know, circumstances came about that it didn't. But first question is, how accurate are the statistics if crimes like mine aren't being reported or prosecuted, I should say? And so what does that do for the numbers that you're talking about tonight?
It's the difference between prosecuted cases and complaints. And they don't track complaints unless you look force by force, and that police force in that community has to decide to want to do it. So very often situations like yours would not be reported, but you're hitting on a very important issue, which I'll start with you, Mayor Scott. You know, it used to be here in New York City, there were tremendous strides made in criminality with something that was called the broken windows policy. You go after low-level offenders because they become higher-level offenders if you don't deal with them early on. And Commissioner Bratton and, of course, Mayor Giuliani became famous on this as crime went down. Now it seems that the left is arguing not to prosecute that level of crime because it's disproportionately aggressive on one race and it's ineffective in crime overall. These stories are starting to populate the discussion. What's your response?
Well, I think it's first to really level set and understand our role as mayors. We lead our police departments. Our police department's role is to, one, prevent crime, but when crime happens, do our best to ensure that we capture those perpetrators who've committed the crime. In the city of Little Rock, we have above national average of a capture rate of somewhere close to 70 to 72%. However, we do understand that many times it's a three-pronged approach when it comes to law enforcement. You have the arresting authority, which we all lead. You have our prosecutors who have to prosecute the crime. Number one, also make certain that they're listening to the community, ensure that you're moving from a complaint to an actual charge. And then finally, to the judicial standpoint, and ensure many times that you are sentencing these individuals, particularly those who are creating habitual habits of doing things. Our main issue many times is we may arrest the person, the prosecutor may prosecute the person. There are some times when our judges, between that time period, there are individuals, some judges who are giving low-level bonds as it relates to highly violent individuals. And we don't understand or know when that individual is back on the street until he or she commits another crime. We've seen that many different times where you have what we call shooters who are going around, they shoot someone, our officers pick them up, they go through the system, prosecutors are doing exactly what they're doing, but then we have low-level bonds, because I can tell you right now, a $50,000 bond is nothing to a shooter or a drug dealer. That's $5,000. They can easily get that.
But Democrats all over the country have been pushing to make it easier and have lower or no bail because it was seen as disproportionate. And you had socioeconomic imbalances where people were being stuck in jail even when they didn't commit the crime.
I think
so now you have cashless bail as a Democrat mandate. Now
I think you have to understand that we as mayors, it doesn't matter if you're blue, green, or red. At the end of the day, it's about, can you pick up the robbers, catch the fires, and things of that nature from a standpoint. That's our job. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or not.
Now, listen, I'll tell you what, I respect the answer. But it does, once again, and maybe it is a shame campaign, and I shouldn't have run away from that suggestion that I made myself early on. But the mayors who didn't show up here, I'm telling you, nothing changes if nothing changes. And if your people in power don't want to be held to account and don't want to answer the questions that make them uncomfortable, you just heard a Democrat mayor say, yeah, no, that's a Democrat policy. It's not working well for us, and we have to find a better way. That's leadership, okay? Now, you may not like other things Mayor Scott says. You may agree with all of it. Doesn't matter. It's that if you're not out there to answer the questions, how can you be held to account, okay? Now, one balanced question, then I want to go to someone in the audience. Mayor O'Neill, you've worn 2 of the 3 hats that Mayor Scott just outlined, right? Because you were a judge for a long time, now you're mayor. This perception is largely, and again, not to play politics because it doesn't get us anywhere, but Democrats are making very effective arguments, they think, certainly strenuous ones, that there are prosecutors all over the country that are not going after these low-level offenses, which is why you see all this shoplifting and stuff, and that they have reasons for it that go to an imbalance of prosecutions on lower socioeconomic levels. But I don't think there's any one aspect of media that has pumped up fears about crime as much as these videos of people going untouched in and out of stores with whatever they want, because none of us have ever seen that except if it was a function of a riot or something like that. So what is your understanding of the policy, and what is your assessment of it?
So, you know, I've been around for the defund the police movement, and I've watched the bail argument about no cash bonds or all of that. You know, I don't agree with a lot of those things. Having sat at the front seat and watched a lot of this play out, right? So let's talk about cash bonds. Mind you, there's always gonna be a segment of a population that's gonna be affected negatively. That's just, it's a lot of people in a lot of systems. But you have to have a way to get people to court. So when someone offers me another alternative other than the bail system that we have, I'm willing to look at it. But you can't just discount what has been going on for a long time without really understanding how it all interplays. For instance, if you have someone who's been charged with first-degree murder, right? Mind you, they may have a clean record, never been charged before. They're going to have a period of time that they will have to wait to be tried. In the interim, how are you going to ensure that that person comes into court? What is fair in that system? How do we do that? At the same time, on the other end, you may have people who are committing very low offenses, shoplifting, so we say. But suppose they've done 10 of them in the last 15 years, and then they have a history of failure to appear. How do you equalize that? I haven't seen from a judge's standpoint. There are some other ways that you can do that in terms of you can have electronic house arrest, you can have all kinds of interim ways. You can send people to diversion beforehand. You can have them to have curfews, all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, for some of these things, you're gonna have to have a system that works for the majority. And America moves on money.
Right. So, good point. Again, interesting to hear from a Democrat. Because this is largely a Democrat policy. The obvious criticism was that judges had all their discretion taken away. They're hearing the complaints, but the laws haven't changed, even in a state like New York. And yes, my brother was governor here. My father was governor here also. My brother was there when they were doing these bail reforms. They know they're a problem, but they're not fixing them. What does that tell you? Politics can poison the idea of solving a problem. Why? Because if you change your position in politics, that's seen as a crime as well. Now, there's another question from Dallas, Fort Worth. Who is it? Mary. Mary, how you doing? How's it going there? Everybody awake? All right, good. It's the main metric. What's your question?
I have a question. We just had a bomb threat at one of our local malls, and my question is this. It's affecting, I looked up the numbers, maybe $76 million are being lost by crime in the malls, which is affecting business. And that's my question. What are the officials doing and the law enforcement doing to protect the business owners who are being affected by all these things.
Thank you. Appreciate the question. Say hello to everybody there. Mayor Bronin, let's look at this two ways. How do you protect your businesses? Because they're going to be the engine of your community in terms of your jobs and places to get everything that the community needs. The flip side is that when there is all this property crime in those places, I believe it gets passed along in prices and inconvenience to everybody else. So I think the corporations figure out a way to protect themselves. But what is the role of government in dealing with exposure of these businesses to crime? Bombs being called in is somewhat of a rare circumstance, but there are a lot of other common categories of crime.
Sure. We often talk about being tough on crime as if it's obvious what that means. But sometimes what's most important is that there are swift and reliable consequences. It's not about the severity of them. It's about the fact that there are consequences that you can count on. And I think that's one of the things that's missing from the conversation. The idea of the 3 strikes laws, that was crazy. I mean, it was crazy from a public policy standpoint. It was crazy from a taxpayer standpoint. It was crazy just from a human standpoint. But we have to make sure that they're appropriate.
It sounded great, though.
Sure.
That's why it was so popular. 3 strikes were in baseball.
To your
you got
point.
3 chances. But you have to deal with that part of it because it made sense to people. What did they miss? That just because somebody's done something 3 times doesn't mean that that kind of penalty is going to keep you safer.
Well, look, I mean, I think there are so many ways in which that policy failed, but I think you said it at the start, fear the simple answers to complex solutions. I agree with that. There are not simple answers here. I do think that there need to be consequences, but we also have to make sure that when we impose consequences, we're not then just cutting people off from opportunity down the road. One of the things that is my community is still dealing with is that the over-incarceration that we saw in the 1990s and the early 2000s closed the door to opportunity for so many people. They can't figure out how to get back on track because they can't get a job. Many times they can't get housing because of that record. We have to figure out a way to make it possible for people to get back on track. So I just think in so many of these, on so much of this conversation, we have to reject the false choice. It's not about tough on crime, lock people up forever versus doing nothing. It's about having reliable, predictable, real, swift consequences, making sure that those consequences correct behavior as best you can, and also making sure that they then don't result in somebody getting stuck forever without the ability to build a different kind of life, because that's not good for anybody. That doesn't make for safer communities. That doesn't make for a safer country.
All right, we have a question here. Madeline?
Right here.
Oh, here we go.
Hello. My name is Madeline Brame. My son was murdered in 2018. My son was an Afghanistan war retired veteran. My son was not shot to death. He was stabbed to death in Harlem by 4 people he did not know, nor had he done them any harm. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg released 2 of the individuals that were charged and indicted for first-degree gang assault and second-degree murder, all captured on video. There was no question about who did this to my son, what they did. They were on video. So when you talk about, judges having the discretion, making the decision about if someone is, charged with murder, even if they had a clean record, what do you do with that person? Do you just cut them loose? Do you just dismiss those murder charges against that person and you bring no justice and closure for the victims, all right? And that brings me to my second part of my question. Bail reform, less is more, raise the age, elder parole, all that garbage, all right, that's happening here in New York City is nothing but a runaway train that's crashing right into the Black and brown communities.
Thank you for your question. Mayor Kapsakevich, I want you to start with this. And obviously, Mayor O'Neill, you'll be relevant because you're a judge, former judge. And just for context, for the complaint, of course, it's personal. The hardest thing for any parent is to have to see a child suffer, let alone lose them. And I couldn't imagine it. None of us could. The Oakland NAACP just put out a letter saying largely the same thing, which is, hey, all this talk was great, when it was boosting up the left to come together for the election. But it's killing our communities because we don't have the policing we need. The resources have moved, and it's hurting the communities that were talked about being helped the most. So how do you address, Mr. Mayor, this imbalance between what in many cases Democrats were saying was the right thing, which now seems to be causing the wrong outcomes in those same communities they wanted to help?
The Bill Peduto was the mayor of Pittsburgh. He's not anymore, but he was a great mayor, and he had an expression that I think is relevant. He said there's three types of people in the world: Democrats, Republicans, and mayors. We don't have the time or inclination to be partisan, to be ideologues. Frankly, we're in his city. Best mayor in the history of the country was Fiorello LaGuardia, and his line was similar. It was, potholes aren't partisan. In other words, mayors are hired to solve problems. And I think what you've heard up here is Democratic mayors breaking away from party orthodoxy in a great way. You heard me say that we've grown the size of the police force. Again, I don't know a single city that has defunded the police. We sure as heck can't. We have Democrats who are, let's say, unpersuaded by the wisdom of bail reform, et cetera. That is typical for the job we have, because we're not ideologues, we're problem solvers. I'd like to think that one of the reasons our numbers are so good in Toledo this year is because we've done a little bit of everything, and I don't care what the ideology is. And if it's conservative right wing to add police, well, then guilty as charged. Some might say it's a left wing wacko that invests in youth programming. Well, we've done both, because what we do is we solve problems. The partisanship that you keep talking about doesn't come from city halls. It comes from state legislatures, a lot of times who preempt the decisions that mayors try to make, and Washington. Those are the partisan political animals. LaGuardia was right. Potholes aren't political. There are problems, we try to solve them. So it's not a surprise to me at all that Democratic mayors up here are not enamored with Democratic Party orthodoxy in a couple of cases, because that's not what we do. And if we're having success in Toledo, it's because we approach things just from a problem-solving perspective.
Just like regular people.
That's right.
Mayor Scott.
No, I was just going to agree with the mayor that I think the audience should understand from a mayoral standpoint, going back to your respective communities, understand that your mayor is an executive leader. Your state representative, your state senator, your U.S. congressman, your U.S. senator, they're legislators. Their living job is to argue. Whereas for us, we're going to argue now and then, but it's really to focus on how we move from platitudes to policy and action with a real issue that's happening in the day and time in our lives. And so it doesn't matter if you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat, or you're independent. Like he said, it's a both-and approach. I've been very progressive on public safety reform, but been very progressive on public safety. And I think that it's not an either or, it's a both and in how we move forward, because that's exactly what Little Rockians want. They want to make certain you have a safe city, but also they don't want officers cracking heads over people for no apparent reason. Well, so that's the reason why we have to have this both and.
I want to get take from both of you, and then we're going to go to break. But just to keep it in context, let's be honest about this. A lot of this happened in the wake of what we saw happen to George Floyd. And it created a wave of a desire for change. And this was too harsh. This was too much. And whether you agree with that is, of course, subjective. But the response was less policing. Don't be so harsh on these communities.
No, the response was not less policing.
No.
There's not a single city.
The talk. I get your defund thing, and I'd have to look at that.
Talk is narrative. Politicians talk.
But it matters. It's what people hear, and it's what they then come to expect from the people who are saying those things.
I'd like to think facts matter too. There's not one city that...
Absolutely. But when the fact is, people say after George Floyd, and again, I'm not judging it. I'm just, as someone who lived it, right?
They can say whatever they want. They can say grass is blue.
I know, but they're in your party, and they're putting it out there as a message of what's going to matter going forward. So now, Mayor O'Neill, you're left with it. You got a lot of people within your party who have expectations that you're going to stop the police from doing these things, and that if someone, that race matters in policing and you have to have less policing as a result, what do you say?
Well, so, Chris, when I think about it, that is another area where very complex problems can be solved pretty much by people just kind of thinking about it, or so they think. First, you have to come to a reckoning in this country that a lot of our systems are broken, right? The mental health system, that was gone when I hit the bench 25 years ago. The Department of Social Services, which is the one that takes care of our abused children, that system was, it was a dinosaur when I was on the bench many years ago. And many aspects of our criminal justice system is the same way. I will bet you never received any services from any government to help you go through what you were doing that instant. Probably still not now. So there are a lot of systems that we have to really hold those politicians who are legislating. You're gonna have to do some reform.
Right.
We have to do some reform to begin to take a look at some of these very real issues that are going on everywhere.
Understood.
So for the criminal justice arena, we had drug courts in North Carolina, right? We had a lot of drug courts, a lot of restorative justice practice. Those things work. But you know what happened? I went in my city the other day to see if we still have drug courts. A lot of that stuff that we know that were working for folk, they're gone. They're no longer being funded. But the mayors don't have any say-so in that part. I am a first among equals. I have to have 4 votes on my council to move anything. And we are brick and mortar. We're policymakers. However, it's the housing that we get the housing calls. We get that somebody's breaking in, somebody's doing the drug dealing. And we have not, as a government entity on any level, city, state, or federal, figured out how we get our politicians to move as we are moving as a society. We are still doing stuff from 1960.
Mayor Bronin, what's your take on this?
Thanks, Chris. So I'm going to come back to this point about framing this as false choices. I think most Americans believe, and I think most of us believe, and I think most Democrats believe, saying as a Democrat, but I think probably Democrats and Republicans, that you can support the police and have accountability for police, that you can work to prevent crime and invest in prevention and getting at the root causes, and you can make sure that you are holding accountable people who are committing acts of violence against other people in your community. Those things aren't in tension with each other. You can do both of those things. And I want to disagree with your characterization of what the Democratic Party orthodoxy is. I'm not here to talk about partisan politics, but since you framed it that way, I actually think what I just said is actually a statement of what the Democratic Party stands for, is that you have to do both of those things in both places. Accountability and support for our police, prevention and accountability when it comes to crime. And coming back to the start, you know, when in the introduction you talked a little bit about the work that we've done in Connecticut that I helped to lead to push for some reforms that would increase accountability for repeat serious firearm offenders, because we were seeing the same people commit acts of violence, sometimes when they were out on parole or probation, and we were able to get that law changed. And I think the vast majority of Democrats, and certainly the coalition that pushed that was a coalition of Democratic mayors in our state, but the Democratic governor, the Democratic mayors, the Democratic legislature all supported that. And at the same time, the Biden administration has put resources into funding police and also put unprecedented resources into supporting community violence prevention through the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that passed last year. So I just think we have to really be careful not to fall into the trap that I think you're trying to keep us out of, but I think, to be honest, you fell into a little bit there of characterizing what a party orthodoxy is. It's a lot more complicated than that.
I appreciate your take, but because of that, I'm getting rid of all of you. No, I'm kidding. I want to thank all the mayors for being with us. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to have other law enforcement officials to come up and give their experience, and we'll get their perspective on what's happening. Mayor Kapsakavich, Mayor Scott Jr., Mayor O'Neill, and Mayor Bronin, thank you very much, and good luck taking care of your people. All right, we'll be right back. When we come back, we're going to talk about guns, we're going to talk about drugs, and we're going to talk about the border. And the big man, Bill O'Reilly's been watching. He wants his say. So we'll see what happens.
Everywhere, in every drug downtown across the United States.
I'm just letting you know we lost another one. We don't even talk about it anymore. What happened? What was it? We know what it is.
It is just alarming. This can't go on.
If you thought fentanyl was dangerous, fentanyl mixed with xylazine is even worse.
I never heard of drink or anything, man, so I came here.
You'd see people walking around looking like animals.
An epidemic of these proportions deserves a response.
I don't want this to be around anymore when my children are born.
This is a war. Act like it. Do something.
The cartel controls everything that happens here.
He just tried to run over the trooper.
The cartel knows when you leave. They're watching us right now.
From pursuits to guns to fentanyl, we are seeing an epidemic of crime.
1050, 1050.
They're aggressive. They're told by the cartels to fight. They're told by the cartels to flee.
Get out!
It's like the wild, wild west down here. We got all three of them this time. Doesn't always happen that way.
Helicopters are just flying over and over our neighborhood, and it almost feels like we're at war.
Underground, now!
I don't even want my granddaughter to stay here. It's scary.
Now, get out!
When you feel unsafe in your own home, there's definitely a problem.
All right, we're back with our special NewsNation Town Hall, Crime in America. Now, we heard from the mayors, and they said, you know, look, we're on the executive side. We're not making a lot. We got to figure out how to do this, but they got to work hand in hand with law enforcement. So what are we seeing in this country? What's working and what isn't, all right? Those men and women who risk their lives to keep us safe, the police officers, the police chiefs, the sheriffs, and how they deal with issues like drugs, homelessness, the border, which has certainly added fuel to the fire. What has it done for the reality? Let's bring in a really good panel of pros. Baltimore State's Attorney Ivan J. Bates, former Chief of Police, Charlottesville, Virginia, Rashal Brackney, Deputy Chief, Louisville, Kentucky, Colonel Paul Humphrey, and Sheriff Mark Lamb of Pinal County, Arizona. And I had that guest I told you about earlier on. Can't talk about crime and not talk about San Francisco. Fair or unfair? And I know that I'm going to get heat for what I just said, but that's okay. We're joined by a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, Matt Dorsey. Matt, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you about it, but I want to get you four to give us your take on what you've heard so far. And I'll start with you, Mr. Attorney in Baltimore. I mean, you know, you are responsible for being the tip of the spear on what gets prosecuted and what doesn't. What is your take on what you've heard and your reality where you are?
Well, I think that all the mayors, we share similar problems. What I have heard is that we're not just going to focus on how we got here. We're going to focus on how we don't get back to where we are. You know, Baltimore, we had an issue. We went to mass incarceration one time. Then we had an issue here lately where we've decided to do nothing, walk past the problem. What we try to do is try to do both of them. We have to hold people accountable. There are some bad people and they have to go to jail. But we also recognize we have to hold people accountable for low-level offenses. We're not about locking you up, but we're trying to do something a little different. Under my administration, we're doing a citation docket. We give citations to these individuals. When they come to court, we're offering them community service, but we're talking about a list of services available. Mental health issues. We have opportunity for drug treatment. We're trying to go ahead and get to individuals where they are. Not once, but twice. You come back a third time, then we now have to prosecute you because we feel that we've given you those opportunities. You have to hold people accountable. If we're not holding people accountable, people will do what they want. Look, I was a criminal defense attorney for 20 years. So I represented a lot of these individuals that now I'm unfortunately prosecuting. And the mindset of the criminal element was that, you know, if you're weak, I'm going to go ahead and take it. I'm going to do what I want to do. And if you don't hold people accountable, if you don't show people you're serious, then you will be taken advantage of. And that's really what's been going on in a lot of the communities.
Now, just to be clear, we invited mayors of both parties from all over the country to come on this show. The Democrats showed up. A lot of the Republicans didn't want to. Doesn't matter to me. The R and the D, they do not matter to me when it comes to how we get better in this country, okay? Two-party system, I'm gonna do a special on that one about how big a part of the problem I think that is. But that's not why we're here. I do believe that you do have to respect people who show up, okay? I asked the Baltimore mayor to come, took a pass. The state attorney is here, making the case for his constituency. That's how you show that you're a leader. It's just how it is. So let me get a question here to kind of catalyst here. Who do we have? Kathy? Okay, Kathy, thank you very much. What is your question?
My question is, I live in Smith County, Virginia, and we have a fentanyl crisis right now. And that's all follows a string of related drugs through history. What do we do when we have these addicted people get out of prison sober? What can be done to keep them from not going and returning to prison?
Thank you very much. Rashal Brackney, do you want to take that question?
So thank you from Charlottesville, Virginia.
I'm originally from Pittsburgh, and I might take an exception with the former comment about Mayor Peduto, but that's a whole nother story. So here's the problem. We think we have these binaries. Everything is a false choice, that either we lock people up. If we're not locking them up, we're not tough on crime. As someone who's been in policing for 38 years here, I have seen all of the ebbs and flows. What the problem is we don't have resources. And if we do have resources, we don't have capacity, right? We think that the only way that you can address a drug issue is to lock someone up, that it has to be punitive. And we've become a punitive carceral state. That is the only thing that we seem to understand. And it's not getting us our desired results. As someone who has locked up a lot of individuals, who is also very into police reform, I understand that if we don't give the right resources, we will never have the outcomes that we desire as a nation. And we're not willing to do that.
Let's get a question from Fort Worth, Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. Who do we have? Brendan, how you doing, bud? What's your question?
I'm doing well. My question is, as the conditions worsen along the Texas border, immigration is increasing, what plans do we have in place to protect us from criminals entering in through the border?
Sheriff Lamb.
Yeah, that's right in my wheelhouse. You know, we are not on the border. I'm a county right between Phoenix and Tucson, but we deal with the border crisis every day. And like I tell people, this is not about immigration, folks. This is about human trafficking and drug trafficking into this country. And Americans are losing their lives every day to the fentanyl that is being trafficked over by these cartels, by the policies put in place by all politicians. They're all at fault because they've yet failed to put common sense immigration together. But what we've got to do is we've got to do something about it. We can't just stand there and let this happen. The fentanyl's coming over in unprecedented amounts. The cartels have gone from making $500 million a year to $13 billion. And to give you an idea just how dangerous this is, last week or the week before, there was about 1,600 people that came through the Yuma sector that were apprehended from 43 different countries. They have caught 140 people that have been on the terrorist watch list this year thus far. There have been 92,000 unaccompanied minors that have come into this country this year so far, 150,000 last year. And what this is doing is putting our communities at risk. Now, you're not going to find more humane people than the Border Patrol agents, the CBP agents, and the sheriffs, and the local law enforcement that go out and do this job every day. I send my helicopter and my troops out to save people that the cartels have left for dead. I try to stop the trafficking of drugs and humans into my community every day. We feel a responsibility to protect your families from the fentanyl that's coming in.
A quick question for the audience, and then we're going to take an audience question. Who believes that the United States should consider the Mexican drug cartels terrorist organizations? Yes. Who believes that the United States should have a much tougher posture on Mexico about what is coming over the border that is their responsibility? Yes. All right. Okay, good to know. All right. Ben in New York. There we are. It's a long walk, Ben. This better be a good question. All right. What do you have?
What's up, guys? Well, one, thank you guys for being here. Two, so I'm here to talk about homelessness, specifically, aggressive homelessness here in New York. Now, I've been in New York most of my life, and I could say that with compassion and empathy. You can't walk down the street without seeing this and seeing this unfold in front of your eyes. Now, here's the dilemma, right? Is when you watch the aggressive behavior, it could be to somebody a little bit more susceptible than yourself. You don't want to sit back and do nothing, but you also don't want another Daniel Penny situation happen. Where do you stand on that, and what would you say from your position on what we should do to eliminate us from getting involved in potentially life-threatening scenarios like that?
Good question. Thank you. In fairness to context, let's go to Matt Dorsey in San Francisco, who's joining us. He's on the Board of Supervisors out there. San Francisco has become like the poster child for homelessness run amok. Do you think that is fair? And what is the line and what is the duty of those in power like you?
Well, I think, here in San Francisco, I will say this, that we have a reputation for highly visible lawlessness. One thing that I would say is As major American cities go, I think most cities would trade their violent crime problem for San Francisco's drug-related and property crime problem, just because in violent crime, metrics, we do pretty well. All that being said, we have a very serious problem with fentanyl and drug-related crime that is manifested in street conditions, homelessness, retail theft. What we are seeing also that is of most concerning to me, and I will say it's concerning and it's personal to me because I'm a recovering addict myself. I believe in the possibility of recovery, and it's played an important part of my life for most of my adult life. So I don't want to give up on anybody. But we are seeing a loss of life here that is twice as deadly as COVID-19 from drug overdose deaths. It is the most serious public health calamity we have faced in this city since the AIDS crisis. And it's getting worse. We are right now on pace for the deadliest year in drug overdoses in San Francisco history. We could lose 700 people this year, 2 people a day, to drug overdoses. So that is what is driving a lot of the highly visible kinds of street-level crime, retail theft. And I believe we have to do more to involve law enforcement. One of the things that I'm going to be working with Mayor London Breed on is getting more money into the budget for jail health, because San Francisco is starting to make arrests of individuals who are brazenly using drugs on the street. In my view, as somebody who has, like I said, has been in recovery, I think if we can make an intervention in somebody's addiction and do it in a way that we're making sure that they have access to medically assisted treatment and all the health services, we don't have to make this punitive. We can make it a life-saving intervention.
All right, got another question from the audience. Hawk?
Hey, Hawk Newsom, founder of Black Lives Matter, co-founder of Black Opportunities. I don't think we have a crime problem. I think we have a lack of vision problem, a lack of truth problem. Our organization sees problems in the community, we fix them. We have 15 at-risk youth here with us today. We own a Montessori public school in our community. We do the work. Last year, we went to the hottest spots in Harlem, the most violent spots in Harlem, and decreased shootings by 40%. No politician in New York City offered us help to get back out there and do that again this year. While we're on New York City, we have to talk about Eric Adams. He always talks about crime being down. Yeah, shootings are down, but there were 381 incidences of shootings last year, but 4,800 felony assaults. So I might not get shot, but I might get stabbed. I might get bust in my head. And when I talk about vision to get past crime, we need the vision it took to get past slavery. We didn't think we could live past Jim Crow, but we did. If we're talking about crime, there has to be a race element to it. There has to be a close attention played to statistics. Poverty causes crime. This is not a Republican fact or a Democrat fact. Poverty causes crime. Education leads people to jail, and schools are failing in every state, blue or red. So the question becomes, what are you gonna do? You're gonna let these politicians get up year after year and make the same speeches, or are we gonna take control of our communities ourselves?
Thank you, Hawk. Look, I want to go to Colonel Humphreys on this. If you can have an active community that wants to take care of its own people and, really make sure that it has its own standards, we'd be in a much better place in America than we are today. It's really hard for us to figure out what our connective tissue is because we're so busy doing this all the time, right? So in your experience, Colonel, in dealing with what you're seeing in Louisville, Kentucky, let's take Hawk's point first, and we'll then go to drugs. Of course, they're related. But how do you negotiate, this tension between being strong and caring about the people that you're policing?
So I don't think there has to be a tension. I think what he's talking about here is how can the community solve the community's problems? The police department just has to be part of that solution. And fact of the matter is that police officers interact with more people than any other arm of the government. And our opportunities to partner with people like Mr. Hawks is crucial. So we're not going to solve a crime problem by simply taking an approach of how do we lock up more people. It's how do we bring people to the opportunities to stay away from crime in the first place. If we can interact with a child at 9, 10, 12 years old, and we get them then, and we get them connected to people like him, then we've solved the problem. We've touched the problem before it ever becomes the issue where that person becomes either a victim or a perpetrator in the future. And that's ultimately the goal, is to prevent the victimization and the perpetration of crime in the future.
How has fentanyl changed the game for you?
Oh, fentanyl's been a crisis for years now, and I think, the sheriff summed it up. It's a scary, scary deal. And the heroin and fentanyl crisis, what it did was it woke up America to problems that particularly black and brown communities, poor communities, have been facing for a long time.
That's right.
We have to recognize, and we need to use as an example going forward, right? Poor communities tend to be the miner's canary of the problems that we're gonna have as an entire society. And so we have to make sure that we recognize those things that are happening and solve those problems before they become even larger. We shouldn't have to wait for something to become a pandemic or an epidemic for us to solve that problem. We should treat people like people and human beings and get to them before we reach a crisis level.
Go ahead. I got a question from Chicago that is going to take us in a new direction. I'll come to both of you. Dusty, what's the name of my guest in Chicago? Elizabeth, how you doing? What's your question?
A few months back, I was robbed at gunpoint walking down the street in front of my house in a Chicago neighborhood. I was told by the police that they wouldn't catch the perpetrators, who then went on that evening to rob an additional 12 to 15 people. When did the police force lose their sense of urgency?
Appreciate the question. Brackney, take that.
So I think part of the issue becomes really for me a couple of things, right? We had this Ferguson effect after Michael Brown, where the community or the nation or officers thought, oh, they weren't going to be supported after Michael Brown, and they were not going to police, they were not going to be proactive, they were not going to do a lot of things. And then there was this swing, again, and we've heard it several times now, about the defund the police concept. So there's this tension between, are the police ever going to get this right? Here's what I think the problem is ultimately is this, is that people want good, healthy relationships with police. When you talk about defund the police, they just don't want to be policed the way they were being policed. They want them there to be supportive, to be helpful, to be part of the solution. To Mr. Hawks' point, and even to the fentanyl crisis and to all the other ones, what we need to do first is things to have the vision. What is the problem that we have? Bring the right stakeholders to the conversation who can actually be part of the solution. And the thing that we don't do well here is we never asset map what we currently have in community that can solve the problem beyond bringing government and police into it. We just want the easy solution, which is have government handle it. Let the police be the catch basin for whatever is going on in community. But if we do what is being done in Harlem and other places like Homewood, where I'm from in Pittsburgh, we identify the problem, identify the correct stakeholders, and then the right assets that currently exist to address the problem, and then we don't have to bring in government or police or any other issues. We just use government then to fill the gap between what we have and what we need.
We have a question from Dallas, Fort Worth. Who is it, Dusty? Linda, what's your question?
Well, living in Texas for about 25 to 30 years, I moved to a suburban community so that I would have a good, safe place for my children to grow up in. Recently in Allen, Texas, we had a mass shooting. Because there is open carry and it's so easy to get a gun, I'm afraid. I'm afraid to go just to a regular mall. What can we do about it?
Sheriff Lamb, let me get your perspective, and then we'll get the state attorney's perspective.
Yeah, look, I think that this is a tough one for people to accept, but this is a constitutional right Guns are inanimate objects, incapable on their own of hurting anybody. So I'm going to tell you a personal story real quick. In December, I had a person under the influence of alcohol and drugs driving a car that actually struck my 22-year-old son, my 11-month-old granddaughter, and my daughter-in-law, and killed all three of them. I didn't blame the car. The car was not the person that did it. It was the person who chose to be under the influence of alcohol. Guns in the wrong hands are bad. Guns in the right hands are good. There are 433 million guns in this country. There are only 290 million cars. Yet we have far more death by fatalities by accidents than we do gun crime. Gun crime is relatively low considering what we have. The problem is we have a mental health issue, and we also have bad intentions. And what it is, it's almost, I'm going to push back on the mayor a little bit. It's oftentimes an easy excuse to say it's the gun's fault, instead of actually addressing bad behavior in our communities, of the allowance of crime in our communities. And the last thing we can do is impugn law-abiding citizens with a constitutional right by taking away their rights because bad actors did something bad with a gun. You cannot blame an inanimate object.
All right, let's get some perspective from the audience on this issue. Asiya. Now, Asiya, we know each other. We covered your program.
Yes.
Tell the audience a little bit about how you came in to own this issue the way you have, and what's your question?
First of all, I am a firearms instructor. I agree with you on that issue as well as on the fentanyl. The DEA in DC did a statistic, did some stats, and found that the majority of the homicides that were taking place in DC in high crime areas were also the areas where you have a lot of fentanyl overdoses. So that's true. Also, I can agree with you. My question is this. I have 3 sons. All of them have been victims to gun violence. My youngest son was shot 2 years ago, 6 weeks after my husband was murdered in DC. My husband was trying to defend the elderly man who was being attacked, and he was stabbed in the chest. My son was shot 8 times, twice in the back of the head. He's paralyzed from the waist down. He's a paraplegic. I have an organization that I founded. It's called Rock Now. With my organization, what I do is I go out in the streets, just like you, and I find out what it is we need in the community. What is it that our community is, what's causing the crime, you know? Fentanyl, a lot of them, they're pacifying the pain because they've seen their friends, brothers, sisters, whoever shot and killed in the streets, and this is how they're dealing with it, with opiate addictions. Also, I want to know from you all, what are you all doing as far as trying to get the guns off the streets, you know? And as far as programs, what kind of programs do you have in your community? For us, we have a program through Office of Gun Violence Prevention, along with Progressive Life. They've gone into the community to people like me and him and funded us with many grants that allows us, the people in the community who knows how to deal with the people in the community who are having problems, it allows us to be able to bring programs to them to help, you know, alleviate some of the crime in our communities.
Tell them the name of your organization.
My organization is Rock Now. Rehabilitating our community is key now. I'm about preventive measures. And I also just started a youth golf team, one of the first Black youth golf teams in DC.
All right. It's good to see you. Mr. State Attorney, lot there. How do you deal with weapons in your community? And how do you deal with this integration of the gun crime as a function of drug crime?
You know, it's, as you stated, it is a lot. I think one of the things that's allowed me to be, I think, a pretty effective state's attorney is understand the community, having been a defense attorney. And one of the things you do know, and I said earlier, in the streets, if you're weak, they want to take advantage of you. Everybody was carrying illegal handguns. Not worried about the legal guns, the illegal handguns. We had a mass shooting. 30 people got shot. Well, we're realizing all young people were there and all young people are carrying guns. Yes, they are afraid, but they also don't understand the consequences of their actions. So when I ran, one of the things I talked about, and I got a lot of heat from it, I said, carry a legal gun, bring a toothbrush, because we're going to send you to jail. I'm not trying to send you to jail because I want to have mass incarceration. I need to sit you down so you can understand what you're doing. Because we're understanding right now, we have a 25% decrease in murders in Baltimore, which is unheard of in many ways for us. 8 years in a row, we've had 300 plus homicides, which is absurd for a city of our size. What we're saying now is, if you have a handgun, there are consequences. But I'm not going to throw you away. You're going to come home with these illegal handguns. And we want to go ahead and give you the services and the programs needed so that you can expunge your record, which sounds crazy. Because by the time they're carrying a gun when they're young, they're running around. But by the time they're 30, 32, 34, they may have 1 or 2 children. They can't get a job. They have the scarlet letter. What can we do now to make sure that you've done what you need to do, that we can go ahead and get you a job, get you job training? Because what we've done, we're partnering with other groups in the community that are doing that work. So when I talked about the citation docket, it's not my office. It's all the other groups in the city that are doing that work. But we're holding you accountable, saying that you will go to jail. But we're also saying, when you come out of jail, we're going to give you the hands up. And if you do what you're supposed to, we'll help you expunge your record. That's how you change the mentality. We're not playing with you, but if you get right, you do right, we can help you do what you need to do for your family.
I have another question in the audience, but Sheriff, I want you to talk about something that's going to be a natural consequence of the points that you made, which is some of the shootings that we care about the most. Just so all of you know, you may know this already, forgive me if you do, but for those of you at home that don't, the #1 gun crime in America, if you think about it, it's nothing that we've talked about tonight. Suicide is the #1 gun crime in America. Why? Because it's much easier to kill yourself when you have access to a weapon. That's not as sexy. It doesn't feel as good to fight about it, so we don't. But school shootings, we do fight about, even though it's such a small percentage of crime because of the God forbid factor, that it's our kids, what you've had to live through, what the young lady in the front rows had to live through, what you had to live through. So that's why it's so much more visceral. When people look at that problem, they say the type of gun matters, the type of weapon matters. What do you say to that, to the argument that these school shootings always use long guns with high capacity? Why do we need those? Can't you have the right, so you can have a gun owner like me, law enforcement like you, keep the right, but do it right? What do you say to that?
And that's a great question, Chris, and a lot of people ask it. And I don't think that all the school shootings are done with a rifle. Most of them are done with a handgun. And it's a relatively low number of school shootings with the amount of schools in America. And I'm not justifying that in any stretch of the imagination. But where this starts is us protecting our children. Like, I'm a strong proponent of school resource officers, making sure that we have one entrance into a school. We do a far better job of protecting our airports and planes than we do our children at our schools. And I think that's where we've deviated as a society. The people that are going in and doing these shootings, even in the communities outside of schools, are oftentimes doing it illegally. We just had a guy who robbed a store the other day in one of our communities. The guy was being compliant. He ends up getting violent and ends up shooting, killing that store owner. He was a convicted felon. He didn't have the right to have a gun. It was an illegal firearm, as are many of these situations. What we need to do is just do a better job of getting to our children that we notice they have starting to have mental health. My understanding is the majority of these kids that have been involved in school shootings had signs of this earlier on, and even some of the law enforcement agencies noticed these signs earlier on and failed to act on it. I do a youth redirection program where I take youth that are struggling and I do it as a mentorship program, and they don't even go to the county attorney or the court. And I've had over 200 kids come to this program of all different races, religions, backgrounds, and I've had about 5 reoffend. So there are programs we can do, and if we catch these kids early enough and address these issues that we're dealing with, I think we can ultimately reduce a lot of these crimes that we do not want to see in our communities.
Lisa, here in the back.
Thanks, Chris. My question is about, we're really concerned about our children. I have 4 daughters. They're in their 20s. And you can imagine, a lot of sleepless nights, and they're never in the same state. Recently, we had our oldest daughter who went to celebrate her friend's engagement in Philly. Her car was stolen. Even in our small community, our small residential community in Connecticut, we have to be really vigilant about making sure our car doors are locked. Auto theft is up. What are we doing about auto theft?
Matt Dorsey in San Francisco. Thank you very much. Yeah, I actually don't understand it. I've been trying to get a better handle on this, Matt. Maybe you can help me, and then we'll come to the panel, of course. Vehicle theft is up higher than anything else, like almost several fold. What is your experience with it, and how do you explain it?
So it is a problem in the Bay Area, and it's a problem in San Francisco. And I would say that it is attributable in many respects to a problem that San Francisco has that I know isn't unique to our city, and that is an understaffed police department. Right now, we are facing a demographic problem with a disproportionately large generational cohort of police officer hired during the Clinton administration, and all of those police officers are now coming up on retirement age. So right now, I will say this as somebody who has been in and around law enforcement for most of my career, I have never seen a more competitive environment for law enforcement. And when police departments are understaffed, what happens is more and more of the law enforcement officer's job is spent responding to the priority A, priority B, 911, life and danger, kinds of calls, and less going after the kinds of property crimes that auto theft represents. That's also true of public drug use, street-level drug dealing, retail theft. It's the lower-level kinds of crimes that thrive when you don't have enough of a police force to adequately police your city.
I appreciate it, but I still don't really get it. Not because of you, Matt, just because this is the piece of cheese that's on top of my shoulders. But Colonel Humphrey, the idea of it being so much more than other property crime. I mean, it's hard to find a community where you don't see vehicle thefts really outpacing anything else. What's your experience in Louisville about why this is happening?
So we've had the same problem, and I think really when you break it down, about 70%, depending on where you are, of the increase in vehicle thefts come from Hyundais and Kias, and the ease by which you can steal those. If you took those out, I think most places would go down. But that doesn't change the fact that somebody's stealing those cars, regardless of how easy they are. So you have the crossover between the opportunity and the person who's willing to do it. So what are we doing on the front side to get to the person who's willing to do it, and what are we doing on the back side? And fact of the matter is that because of spikes in violent crime, because of the way the criminal courts have changed in the past 2 years post-pandemic, and the system being overwhelmed, those haven't been treated as a priority. And fact of the matter is that they are. And those kids that are, and primarily young people, those people that are out there stealing these cars are ultimately going to be tomorrow's shooters and tomorrow's homicide victims. Because we understand that when you start to commit smaller crimes and you have no consequences, and you don't have somebody that pulls you in at the very beginning and says, there's another path for you that you can see. It's not that we don't have opportunities in this country, it's that people often don't see them or have access to the vision, like he was talking about, to know that there's an opportunity to do something differently. So we have to both get them at the front side, and fact of the matter is we have to hold people accountable, particularly young people, before they become the next person.
We have a question from Dallas-Fort Worth. Who is it? Bren.
Hi, Bren Nelson. I'm a high school teacher down in North Dallas.
How you doing? What's your question?
Doing good, Chris. My question is, with regards to the drug issues, the mainstream media tends to disproportionately focus on drug crimes in cities when, in reality, per capita, there's far more drug issues in rural areas. And do you think that the mainstream media's focus on the drug issues in urban cities is taking away attention and possibly resources that could be going to rural areas of this country?
Sadly, that feels like a question for me, which is never what I want. But look, like everything else, there are layers to the situation, okay? There's no question that the media will cover something that hits the suburbs and areas that are predominantly white faster and differently than they will if it's an inner city issue. And here's why. There's a perception, and obviously it's easy to say it's wrong, but it still exists, that, oh, that's what they do in the hood. That's what they do in the cities. That's what they do in the ghettos, as they used to say when I was growing up. They do drugs. So then all of a sudden, meth makes its way into your high school in your suburb or your exurb or what you called rural. Fentanyl starts finding its way into other drugs. That kids think they think they're getting pills out of somebody's medicine cabinet, and it turns out they have a touch of fentanyl in them. One of them doesn't come home. Now it's a problem. Now we talk about it. Everybody who's been on tonight with you has heard about fentanyl for a decade, longer. And they heard about the new heroin before that, and they heard about meth and how easy it was before that. It's just, it doesn't matter in this country until you get to the people who are making the decisions and their constituents. And I know that that sounds harsh. The media winds up being a reflection of the urgency of the people it's covering. And it's not an excuse, it's just an explanation for how it is. You don't hear the media cover a lot about poverty. You'll almost never hear the media talk about life on reservations, unless there's like a murder that happens there that's particularly interesting. And then everybody loves that, so we'll cover that. But we stay away from things and we call it compassion fatigue. But I actually think that what we've learned is we've been feeding into our own weakness. And if America isn't a country that becomes about interconnection and interdependence, if we don't fall back on what brings us together, we've never accomplished anything in this country any other way. So I think what we're doing here and what we're trying to do, I think in a lot of different sectors, certainly in your lives, which are really hard on the political side as mayors and in law enforcement, because you're so tied to so many other people's agendas, is, you know, as you were saying, Lamb, finding ways to have people care about each other again. And reaching out to people. I have a friend who I've had on the show. She's a psychiatrist. She won the Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor for President Trump, okay? Her name is Kelly Posner. She's a psychiatrist. She started something called the Columbia Lighthouse Protocol. Now, that's not what it was called, but I kept getting the name wrong, so she wound up just calling it that because every time I was on TV, I mangled the name of the program. But what it is there's a list of questions that you ask somebody who is a direct report to you if you're at work, or a friend in the military. She was the only person that could find a way. You know, suicidality in the military has been a real problem on the rise for a while. They couldn't figure it out. She brought it down over 20%. In one of the branches of the military. That's what won her the award. All the protocol is asking people a set of questions, and depending on their answer, making different, helping them with different choice structures about getting help. And that's all it is that if we reach out, if you show you care, you know, like Hawk is doing in the communities around him, if you dare to care, it's amazing what you can do. But we're just in a situation right now where the more you're against somebody else, the more powerful you'll be. What's the next question, Duffy? Roxanne in Chicago, what's your question?
My question is this. As a person with a lived experience, how do we transition a second chance to a true redemption for people who have changed their lives around?
That is a great question. Now, Rochelle, you were talking about this. And I know that Mayor O'Neill was talking about it also, especially when she was on the bench. The reality is, and please feel free to correct the assertion, people, we say we love comebacks. We say we're a nation of second chances. And we are in the right circumstances. But people are not in a hurry to put you back in power if you say that you're going to give people who did bad things a break. So how do you find a way past the idea of being soft on crime to the reality of the best way to get what you call the long-term results that we want, which is as many productive people in society as we can have?
So what's interesting is who we champion for, right? We all love the Rocky story, and he's getting up, and we've all seen Creed 3, and you're getting up off the mat. If it's somebody that looks like you or you can relate to, if it's someone who doesn't, we discard them very quickly. We have no use for them, and we're all pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of individuals. I did it. My granddad did it. My grandmother walked to school, you know, both ways uphill, 5 miles in the snow. And we all believe in that when it's somebody we can relate to, somebody who looks like we look like, or who we believe is worthy of a second chance. The way you get to the real authentic second chances, look at yourself. Have you ever made a mistake in life and just wished that someone would let it go? Like you're reminded of it all the time. When you can empathize with someone because you've been there, I come from a very poor community. I am first generation education. I am the only one in my family who has a doctorate. So on top of Chief, you can call me Dr. Brackney on top of that too. But the thing is, somebody believed in me. Someone saw this little biracial, multi-ethnic girl who identifies as Black and says, I believe in the possibility of that person because someone recognized the humanity in me. Until we start recognizing the humanity in each other and not what's, all these divisive and derisive things about each other, like I can honestly look a person in the eye and say, we may disagree on policy. I disagree that I believe it, if we can blame guns, we can blame fentanyl. Like we don't ever seem to blame the inanimate object of fentanyl because of who is harmed by it, by the opioids. So it's those kind of things. I have to look at you and see the humanity in you and believe that you're worthy of it. And that's what the humanities do for us. Somebody gave me a chance, someone believed in me, and I've just got to believe in someone else for them to have an authentic second chance.
We're going to take a break. We'll come back with more of this. Bill O'Reilly's going to join the conversation with us. I'll give you a question and a break. Let's see who can answer it right first. Who said it is not fair to tell a man to pull himself up by his bootstraps when he has no boots? Who said it? Next. One of the biggest names in the business and certainly one of my most dreaded critics, Bill O'Reilly, has been watching our town hall, and he has observations of value. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. O'Reilly, what is your takeaway to this point tonight?
Well, I'm happy everybody participated. It's good to hear people's opinions on a very vital issue in this country. I think there's a lot of theory, and that doesn't get us very much. So I'm going to come at it from a historical point of view, a fact-based point of view, keeping in mind that people believe what they want to believe. Like you, Cuomo. Whatever you want to believe, you're going to believe. And, facts are facts. That's what I want to believe.
All right, continue.
Number one, the issue of crime. If you travel the world, the totalitarian nations do not have a problem with it. There's no crime in Saudi Arabia, no crime in China, no crime in Singapore. The punishments are so harsh, the criminals leave. Okay, that's number one, historical fact. When Mao Zedong took over China in 1949, partly because a quarter of the Chinese population was addicted to opium, and that destroyed Chiang Kai-shek's government, when Mao walked in, he proclaimed that if you use opium, two things are going to happen. We'll either send you to a work camp or we'll shoot you against the wall. Didn't take long for the drug problem to dissipate in Red China. So when I'm listening to the town hall tonight, a couple of things struck me. Number one, and everybody was well-intentioned, somebody said housing is the problem for criminality. That's not true. The Great Depression was the worst time in our country's history, and crime was relatively low. It's a cultural change that drives crime in America. Number two, San Francisco doesn't have enough police officers. That's why everybody's stealing cars. That's not true. They don't prosecute people who steal cars in San Francisco or break into cars or do anything short of violent felony. They are not prosecuted. Number three, drug addicts commit about 75% of street crime. Without drug addicts, crime in this country would be not even an issue. Wouldn't even be talking about it. Yet, we sympathize with drug users and dealers. We don't punish them harshly any longer. Now, crime is a three-pronged situation. Federal. What can the federal government do about crime? It can make all crimes involving a gun, any gun, all felonies involving a gun, a federal crime. And if you're convicted, you get a mandatory 5-year stretch in a penitentiary. Don't give me any of this mass incarceration stuff. It's much more important to protect the folks. You federalize gun crimes, you take it out of the sometimes chaotic locals. The states have to regulate what they do with drug addiction. if you are caught in the commission of a felony with drugs in your bloodstream, you have to go to 22 months rehab inpatient. You're off the street, the market collapses, okay? If you sell heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamine, again, the state should have mandatory prison sentences upon conviction. And the local level, you do the rehab stuff. You reach out to the mentally ill. You form communities of caring. That's what you do. But you don't blame this crime epidemic on the police. American policing is the best in the world. But if you're not going to prosecute, as they don't do in New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, Baltimore, St. Louis, on and on and on, all run, by the way, by progressive DAs and mayors, all of them. Okay? You don't prosecute these people, they're going to shoplift all day long. They're going to destroy your community and quality of life, and we're seeing it right before our eyes.
All right, so let's unpack these points because we've got experts here. Mayor O'Neill, I want to come to you first because Bill was saying it's not about housing. What do you believe he has wrong about housing?
Absolutely everything when he says that. He's not living in my reality. Housing is where you start to have a life. And if you don't have basic housing, what kind of life can you have? So yeah, way back then they may have been the case, but it's not true in Durham, North Carolina right now. And that's my reality, is that housing is an issue. And homelessness is an issue, and it feeds into the other issues. So says the middle-class mayor.
Matt Dorsey in San Francisco. Do you need to account for the fact that you aren't prosecuting crimes there? Is he yelling at me right now? I didn't even see, was he? I'll be right back to you, Bill. Hold on a second. Matt Dorsey, the idea that Bill brings up that you also have to look at being soft on prosecutions. And it's not just about manpower, it's about what you do with your manpower. And San Francisco has made a choice that's political and it's hurting the community. Fair criticism?
Well, I would say that it is true that we are understaffed in our police department, but it's also true that San Francisco is taking very seriously the public safety issues, and we are in the midst right now in San Francisco of a voter revolt on public safety. Last year, a district attorney was recalled because there were cases that were not being prosecuted. Voters felt very strongly that they should be prosecuted. Voters were unequivocal in San Francisco that they wanted change in law enforcement and change in who they were electing to take seriously our public safety challenges. Quite frankly, I was a beneficiary of that because I am, an advocate for more police and more public safety. All right. Right now, we have a district attorney in Brooke Jenkins who is prosecuting crimes. We're dealing with still a progressive city. That means progressive judges and progressive juries. But we're turning it around in San Francisco, and I think the comeback is underway here.
Bill?
Yeah, it's a bunch of bull. The mayor of Durham, North Carolina, just insulted every law-abiding poor person in this country that has substandard housing. Do you think, madam, that the overwhelming majority of the poor commit crimes? They do not. They never have. And I said in the Great Depression, with the poorest part of our history, crime was low. This is a cultural thing that's going on here, not a housing thing. Now, I'd like everybody to have a nice house, but you don't deflect the issue. As for San Francisco, it's a circus. People are moving out. The whole place has collapsed. Tourism won't go there. Conventions won't go there. You're not safe there. And the cops are at fault? What a bunch of crap. They're not at fault. They bring them in, and they just cut them loose. And that's why you recalled Chase Boudin, the DA there, because he was irresponsible, putting San Francisco in danger. So let's tell the truth here.
Well, he did say it was recalled, but just so you know. But a response?
Sure. So in North Carolina, and Durham, North Carolina in particular, I've never lived outside of Durham, North Carolina. Let me just put it that way, first of all, so to give you some context. But we had a law that at the age of 13-year-old, you could be convicted and be charged and convicted as a felony. So 25 years ago, I was sitting on a bench and I was watching mothers who were in Section 8 housing, who may have had a kid who had been convicted of a felony, who were making a choice between whether they were going to stay in public housing or whether they were going to put their kid out. So 25 years later, I'm watching these same young African-American men, primarily, who cannot find housing. And they cannot because they have a criminal record, more particularly a felony. Now, and they have not been able to stabilize. So what do you do if you can't stabilize in housing? You make a life because you have to survive. So a lot of them are embedded in public housing and a lot of them are committing crimes. So I'm not sure what reality you're living in, but my reality says that a lot of these young people who are committing these crimes, and I saw them firsthand from the bench, don't have a place to live. Period, hands down.
All right, let's move on to Dallas, Fort Worth. And all right, let's, Colonel, go ahead, weigh in.
Okay, so Bill brought up some good points. And fact of the matter is consequences do matter. Consequences have to be impactful enough that it changes behavior. But when we get to the point where we are looking to Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong for advice on how to handle crime in a democracy, we have a problem. The fact of the matter is that the Constitution is this beautiful document that's the most important secular document that we have. It's what makes us all Americans. And the reason why it's important is because it protects all of us no matter what. It protects both the suspect and the victim. We, as the criminal justice system, have to advocate for victims, which means that we have a responsibility to put people in jail. But we're not going to do extrajudicial executions and lock people up and not give people rights the way that they did in communist China or any of these other countries. Fact of the matter is that if that is the goal, if that's what we're trying to get to, we've lost what America's about anyway.
Sheriff?
Just real quick on, Bill kind of hit on it. You know, we're feeling the spillover from California into Arizona. The other day we had people stealing stuff in a neighboring city. They had hit 8 CVS's and Walgreens. We got the description of the vehicle. It's going down. My guys see it on the I-10 interstate. We pull it over. I'm the second car on there. We've got our guns out, high-risk stop. We got 2 females and a male from California out from LA. They get out to the back. We open the car door. All the stolen goods fall out. I walk back to the car, and she says, "Why did you pull us over?" And I said, "Well, because there's been some thefts in the Walgreens. You match the description. The vehicle matches the description. Plus, when I opened the door, all your crap fell out." And she said, "Well, haven't you heard about the new law?" And I said, "Honey, this is Arizona, not California." I said, "Here, if you steal anything, it's against the law." And then she says, "Well, I believe that if we didn't hurt anybody, and I believe that if we don't hurt anybody, we should be able to steal whatever we want." This is what happens when states like California don't enforce the law and go soft on it. It spills over into our communities, into the urban areas, into the rural suburban areas where people just want to live their life. I'm just a proven conservative fighter trying to do my job. I believe in taking care of other people, and I have a compassionate heart for it. But if we don't start enforcing the law, we're going to lose this entire country, folks.
We have a question in Dallas, Fort Worth. What do you have? Say his name.
Anton Glucky. How y'all doing? I'm Anton Glucky out of Dallas, Texas. I run an organization called Urban Specialists. We work to reduce senseless violence in urban communities. I want to say first that the biggest crime in America is that people think like Bill O'Reilly. Really think like that. I think that we have to challenge that because what we've been doing for the last 2 hours, which is a good conversation, but we've been talking about symptoms of crime and violence and not talking about underlying cause. I love when the young lady was speaking about the issues that cause violence in our communities. We have to start addressing that. I love the conversation about when they took away the programs. Most of crime in our communities is about poverty, is about people. And you said it first, Chris, you said that the reality is that most people look at crime as those people in those communities who are committing crime. So you have to ask yourself, what does that do in terms of our legal system? Let me say this lastly. Brian Stevenson, he is the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative down in Alabama, said, in aviation, if an airplane took off and every 9 airplanes, 1 crashed, we'll have another conversation about aviation. Same way with crime. It's not just no one way. I believe that the biggest problem is Democrats and Republicans, politicians can't come together and come up with some sensible ways that we attack this crime. And it don't have to be one way versus the other. It has to be sensible ways where we address this crime. All too often, we get in our feelings because we've been impacted by crime in one way or another, and that drives the conversation. We got to have conversations about what's work, and I believe that we can hold people accountable and still be able to see their capacity to be transformed and redeemed. That's what we need in this conversation.
So, Bill, how do you feel about the balance?
Well, I mean, that gentleman is very well intentioned, but he's never going to solve anything. All right, the main goal of the government has to be protecting the people. All right, all the sociological stuff comes after that. And then the gentleman who said, oh, we don't want to be like Red China. I'm not saying we want to be like Red China. I'm telling you that punitive measures stop crime. They stop drug addiction, they stop murder, they stop theft. That's the history of it. And I'm also telling you that this is a noble country, or at least it used to be. In the Great Depression, everybody suffered. Yet we weren't breaking in to Walgreens, shoplifting, or knocking old ladies down on the street, because there was a value system that has been corroded by this permissive, progressive movement, which is as dangerous as anything I've seen in my entire 45-year career. There you
All right,
go.
I want to get one more point out there before I say my thank yous, and I really do owe a deep debt of gratitude. This has been much more productive than I could have ever imagined. Dusty thought it would be like this, but that's why she's the boss. I do want to get one point out there, though, and I want a couple of perspectives. I'll start with you, Brackney, Rochelle Brackney. The idea of they created such harsh punishments for drug addicts that the addiction stopped. That can't be true. We would have no addiction in this country if you stopped when people started to hurt you for being an addict. I don't know how many of you, actually, I want to do this. How many of you, that is absolutely right. You got to have treatment. But the idea that, the idea that we don't punish addicts, and that's why we have so many addicts, is demonstrably false. How many people in this audience know somebody, love somebody who's had a problem with addiction? Okay? The idea that we're going to harsh our way out of addiction and that these are bad people making bad choices is nonsense, unless you are so ridiculously blessed that you haven't had to deal with it in your own home and in your own heart. What have we learned about what is your best chance of getting me off drugs?
So it's not Bill's either a coffin or a cage. I mean, that's his.
Well, he says treatment.
Right.
But what happens when you go down the road of treatment?
So here's the thing: we don't have enough infrastructure in place for treatment. If we want to really be authentic about treating what is going on, the ills in our society, then you actually locking someone up with the intention of treating them in that location or force treating them in that location has never been effective. The death penalty is the harshest, and keep waving, the death penalty is the harshest treatment we have in response to crime. It is not a deterrent. We currently have 2,400 people on death row right now, with about 40 of them being women. It has not stopped anyone. So what you have to do is think of, what can we do holistically, wrap around individuals to give them mental health treatment, to give them drug treatments, to allow them to have housing. If people do not have access to mainstream economies, whether we want to admit this or not, they will create their own economies, period, the end, including the drug economy. There are ways, though, that we can treat people literally. It's intensive. It is expensive. I have family members who've gone through rehab. It is not a one and done.
Nope.
This is an over and over and over and over again investment into individuals. And the problem is we have a disposable society. It's either going to be a cage or a coffin, and that's easy for us. It is hard for us to do the hard work so that we can dig deep and see why are so many people addicted now. You know, the Great Depression, they were still all in their own homes. We all know that crime is lower than it has ever been in the United States. So that can't be a cultural shift. It has to be, what were we investing in?
I got you. I don't know how we managed this, but I actually went over on a 2-hour town hall. That's not easy, even for me. I want to thank all, I want to thank all the people in law enforcement. I want to thank the mayors. I want to thank the conversation that's clearly going to keep going here in New York, in Chicago, and in Dallas-Fort Worth. Thank you to everybody who participated in this, and the team and the bosses at NewsNation for giving us this opportunity. I hope it has helped you understand that a complex problem needs complex solutions, but nothing changes if nothing changes. Let the conversation continue. I'll see you here tomorrow night. That's all the time we have. Brian Enton is in for Ashley Banfield right after a quick break. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, thank you. Hey, thank you for watching. Please go to newsnationnow.com, newsnationnow.com, and you can find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button down below. Then you will get more of NewsNation's fact-driven coverage.